David Morales sat in his aging yellow taxi, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. The dim streetlights flickered above, reflecting off the slick pavement from the earlier rain. He let out a weary sigh and checked the time. 11:47 p.m. Another late night. Life hadn't been kind to David lately. At 38, he had once dreamed of owning an auto repair shop, using his knack for fixing engines to build a stable life. But life had other plans. A layoff at the factory where he worked, mounting debts, and the slow unraveling of his marriage had left him scraping by. Driving a cab wasn't what he envisioned, but it was what he had. David's taxi smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked upholstery. The worn seat cushion beneath him was a reminder of how long he'd been at it, ferrying strangers across the city to destinations he could only imagine. As he turned down a quiet street near the park, something unusual caught his eye. A small, unmoving bundle on a bench under a flickering streetlight. David slowed the taxi and pulled over, leaving the engine running. He stepped out, his breath visible in the cool night air. The bundle stirred slightly, and his heart began to race. When he got closer, he saw it was a baby wrapped in a frayed blanket. The child's face was scrunched in discomfort, and soft cries pierced the stillness of the night. "Hey, hey," David whispered, crouching down. His calloused hands gently touched the edge of the blanket. The baby's cries quieted, and she looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. For a moment, David froze. What was a baby doing out here, alone in the middle of the night? He glanced around, but the street was deserted. His pulse quickened as he picked her up, her tiny body light in his arms. "It's okay, little one," he murmured, his voice shaky. "You're safe now." David carried her back to the taxi, wrapping his own jacket around her to shield her from the chill. As she nestled into the warmth, her cries softened, and she stared at him with a curious expression. He sat there for a moment, unsure of what to do. His mind raced. Should he call the police? Take her to the hospital? But then she grasped his finger with her tiny hand, and something shifted inside him. David drove to the nearest police station, his mind swirling with questions. As he sat in the waiting area, holding the baby close, he couldn't help but feel a strange connection to her. The officer on duty listened patiently as David explained what had happened. The baby, whom the social workers would later name Mia, was taken into their care while they tried to locate her family. David handed her over reluctantly, feeling an ache in his chest he hadn't expected. For days, he couldn't get her out of his mind. He told himself it was because he felt sorry for her, abandoned and alone in the world. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. David was no stranger to loneliness. Since his divorce, he'd spent most of his nights working and his days sleeping in his small, one-bedroom apartment. The thought of Mia growing up without someone to love her, to protect her, gnawed at him. A week later, David found himself standing outside the social services office, his palms sweaty. He had no idea what he was doing. He wasn't a parent. He barely made enough to survive. But he couldn't shake the feeling that finding Mia that night wasn't a coincidence. The social worker, a kind woman named Evelyn, greeted him warmly. "Mr. Morales, it's good to see you again. How can I help you?" David hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I was wondering if I could take care of the baby. Mia." Evelyn's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Are you saying you want to foster her?" "I don't know the rules," David admitted, his voice trembling. "I just know I can't stop thinking about her. I want to help her, give her a chance at something better. I feel like I'm supposed to do this." Evelyn studied him for a moment before nodding. "It won't be easy, Mr. Morales. But if you're serious, we can guide you through the process." The weeks that followed were some of the most challenging of David's life. He attended parenting classes, cleaned up his apartment, and learned how to budget for diapers and formula. His friends thought he was crazy. "You're barely getting by as it is," his co-worker, Ramon, said. But David didn't care. The moment Mia was placed in his arms again, he knew he'd made the right choice. The first few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless questions. Why was she crying? Was she sick? How did anyone figure out how to fold those tiny onesies? But as time went on, David found his footing. He learned to decode Mia's cries, discovered the magic of lullabies, and even mastered making baby food from scratch. Mia grew, her laughter filling the once silent apartment. She had big, curious eyes and a contagious giggle that could brighten the darkest days. David wasn't just her caregiver, he was her dad. Mia's presence gave David a renewed sense of purpose. He started working fewer hours as a taxi driver and picked up side jobs repairing cars, slowly building a reputation in the neighborhood. He made sacrifices, new shoes for Mia instead of himself, long hours to save for her future, but he didn't mind. She was worth it. As Mia grew older, she began to ask questions. "Where did I come from, Daddy?" David knelt beside her, his heart full. "I found you on a bench one night, all wrapped up like a little gift, and from that moment you became my everything." Years later, as Mia stood on the stage at her high school graduation, delivering a speech about overcoming adversity and the power of love, David sat in the audience, tears streaming down his face. He had given her all he could, but in truth, she had given him even more. She had given him a reason to hope, to try, to believe in second chances. As Mia looked out at the crowd, her eyes found his. "To my dad," she said, her voice breaking, "thank you for choosing me. Thank you for teaching me that love isn't about where you come from. It's about who stays by your side." The applause was thunderous, but all David could hear was the sound of his own heart, full to bursting. That rainy night so many years ago had changed everything, and he wouldn't trade it for the world.